This video is sponsored by Full Moon Features. If you love horror collectibles, make sure to check out Full Moon's Tiny Terrors. Stick around for more information at the end of the video, or go to the website in the link below. Good evening, campers, dreamers, and babysitters. And yes, we are back, still in Splatterthon, still making things happen here. And yeah, it's been a wild couple of weeks. You know, the things have been kind of starting off a little slow for us. But as we were coming out of Fantastic Fest there and all the other wonderful content that we've been planning, I promise it's going to pick up. And I think this might be the point where it does. Because, of course, we were joined by the always wonderful Evan from Rockland Graves Productions.
Hello.
Evan, how you doing, buddy?
Good. I'm doing very well. I'm very excited for this. I know that these podcasts are always really fun to do, but for all the other movies we have agreed. So I'm excited to change things up a little bit with this episode. Yeah.
Yes, you might see a friendship deteriorate over the course of this. I really hope not. But
yeah.
No, this was something we talked about, I think, right after, was it Scream or Evil Dead?
I don't remember.
Might have been Evil Dead. But we did a spoiler on Evil Dead, and it was a great time. We had a lot of fun. And then, you know, we were just sitting there talking, and, you know, Halloweenends, it's been out for a year. And that's the topic of today's, you know, discussion. We want to go back. We want to do a little retrospective here and just talk about, you know, the fallout of it, our thoughts and feelings. We've all now rewatched the film. Evan has rewatched it many a times. I've watched it, I think, twice since it's been out. And Luke, how many times is this?
I watch it sporadically. I've actually been watching it since I knew this was coming up for the last month, randomly. I have yet to watch it like as full straight through watch. I always have to watch like a half hour and then come back into it. And then, so I've watched it maybe twice all the way through over the past maybe 2 months. Randomly.
I think I've seen it like 6 or 7 times since it came out.
Oh my God. I saw it, I know, 3 times in theaters when it came out. And then just that weekend. And yeah, I took a big break. I got a digital copy shortly after it came out, and then I didn't watch it. And then I think it was, again, like Luke, when we said we were going to do this, I watched it. And then I watched it, obviously, in preparation for this week. And yeah, I think that this is going to be a fun conversation. Obviously, we're going to hit some bullet points. We're going to kind of go over more or less where we think this film stands. But yeah, we're going to debate it. We're going to talk about the haves and have-nots of Halloweenends here, and what we think works and what we think doesn't work, and where Evan thinks we're crazy and where we think Evan is crazy. So, you know, it's gonna be a fun time. But, you know, I just want to preface this by saying, you know, obviously I want you guys to debate in the comments. I want you guys to have this conversation, but let's all be civil. Let's all be cool. Let's, you know, not rip each other apart, because I think that's one of the worst parts of, you know, fandom, in my opinion. I've seen it a lot. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I've been open about that. And, you know, I hate seeing how that, like, community and that culture went, you know, over the last, like, 10 years. And, yeah, it's just, I don't really want it to get there. Horror community is a tight-knit group. We all have our loves. And I think that we can do this civilly. So now that that is out in front of us, I think that we need to discuss our initial viewing here. So why don't we do this? You know, we'll go with Evan, Luke, and then me. We'll keep that rotation, and you know, we'll go counterclockwise. And yeah, Evan, let us know your initial thoughts just after seeing the film, and yeah, what you thought. Like, what were your feelings?
I had a weird relationship with it. My opinion has done this over time until it eventually stabilized somewhere. Because I was a fan of the trilogy. I loved 2018 when it came out. I didn't like Kills when it came out, and then a few months later I revisited it and just had a fucking delayed honeymoon with it. Ends, when it came out, I liked it. I didn't love it. I wasn't over the moon about it. I didn't hate it, but I did enjoy it. I found it was fresh. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was well written, beautifully shot, but I definitely wasn't at the point of loving it, and I was disappointed with a lot of it. So my initial viewing was good. That was how I felt after the first one.
Awesome. And Luke, obviously I was there with you, but go ahead and re-inform the audience of your opinion.
Yeah, so like this one, we had covered it. Obviously, any horror channel is going to cover it up until its release. And initially, like seeing the concept, seeing the trailer, I was like, and being a bigger fan of Kills than I was of 2018, I was intrigued to see where they were going to go with it, because it, from the little synopsis that they gave us, that little bite there, it felt like they were going to do something, you know, unique and a little bit different than what we're used to seeing. And then going into it, you know, I was just kind of scratching my head for most of it and wondering, you know, because it's still an enigma of a film to me. It's something that, as I said, I revisit. I was specifically revisited for this, but over the past year of its release, I have went back and watched it and randomly, you know, throughout, you know, just spurts here and there, because it's something that it's one of those films for me that falls in line with when I'm farther removed from it, I think that maybe it's a better film than it actually is. So I'll go back in with a better intention to say, maybe I've missed something in let me look. And I still think that holds true. I was a little more negative of it coming out, and I'm still not a fan of it. But I think like there are so many grains of great ideas sprinkled throughout that film that if they would have just connected those pieces a little bit better for me, that it could be a little bit better. But, you know, for me, I still was not happy with it.
Yeah, and I was on the same page as you, Luke. We did our I think it was like an hour and a half spoiler discussion after we saw it, like that Saturday. And the beauty of, I guess, these films, or the negative, I guess depends on who you talk to. I like this. Was it, you know, these were on Peacock. I don't know if, is that the same for you guys up in Canada?
We actually don't have Peacock, so I just had to go to a theater for it.
Go to the theater.
We didn't have
Okay.
day and date streaming.
So for us, yeah, it was day and date. So we got to go see it and then come home and rewatch it. And you know, I said I saw it 3 times in theaters. I probably watched this movie 4 or 5 times that weekend alone. And you know, it was, again, I think you saying it was an enigma was probably exactly how I felt. I just felt like this was odd. This was not at all what I expected, but like in not a way that I was happy, you know. And I think that's weird to say. It's like it's always great to, you know, sit here and say, oh, we want Halloween or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street to do something different. But like, just because you're doing something different doesn't mean that you're doing something right, or it doesn't mean that you're doing something well. And I think that the biggest issue go on my subsequent rewatch that I still have with this, now I've softened to some things, and I will admit that I've actually grown to like a couple things in this from my last watch. But I think the biggest thing for me is just the inconsistency of the trilogy when it comes to this film. And I think that that's the hardest part. I think that you can see a clear through line from 18 to Kills. Say what you will, I really like Kills. I think right after I wrap this up, let's just real quick recap our thoughts on not the whole trilogy like beat by beat, but just like how we feel about it, because like I think that that's important. And I like Kills a lot. And 18 I had a lot of issues with, so I feel like there was disdain there. But after Ends, I grew to more fondly of 18 because it was a lot closer to what I wanted. And yeah, it's just been difficult. And I think that this film took some big swings, but again, I still sit here and say that I think this would have been a better 4th movie. I think that if we would have at least closed out that night with Laurie, Michael, and her family and all that, just keep it on that night, or even into the subsequent day and into the next night, like that would have been where I would have done that. Because they build this thing, and I know marketing's different, they bill it as the ending of the Laurie Michael saga, and that feels so much like a sideline plot point. And I still think to this day, even though it probably would have been very predictable, I can't get over that. And that's still been an issue with me going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Evan. What if you want to retort to any of that?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay, so I think, you know, obviously let's give our thoughts and opinions on just like where we sit with the trilogy as a whole. Like we kind of went through Ends, so like 2018 and Kills. Obviously, Evan, you did a little bit there, but like give us a little more detail on that.
Yeah, because I guess we haven't talked about either of those on the podcasts.
Not live, no. We've talked off. But...
we've talked off, yeah, about them. But So when Halloween 2018 came out, had a, I think context of when you see something makes such a huge difference. When the original came out in 1978, my dad was 16 years old, right? And then 40 years later, when 2018 came out, I know I'm a young lad. I was 16 when 2018 came out. So we went together. We saw the original movie in the theater, and then we went to see the new one the next week. So it was kind of like this nice experience of like he was 16 when that came out. I was 16 when this came out. It was like a return to form. And we had a great time. I really, really liked 2018. It has issues, and I think over time I've actually grown to like it a little less than I did at first. But that felt like a really good return to form in so many ways. That long one shot of Michael when he first gets out on Halloween night is one of the best scenes of the whole series. It's amazing. Then Kills came out. I really didn't like it at first because it was so like over the top and like almost Shakespearean in a lot of ways. And then I came back to it months later, and I loved it. It's this like just atmospheric thrill ride that felt like it really set up Michael Myers as the boogeyman that he was supposed to be. I loved the pandemonium and the mayhem. It felt like this just fervor of violence and insanity. And then going into Ends, obviously we were all like, what the fuck is this the first time we saw it? It has recontextualized a lot of things about those two movies for me that actually make me like them more. Like Kills, for example, having Kills be sort of that final spree of the boogeyman in the way that we know him, where it's just this crazy, everyone's losing their minds and the mob beat down. It recontextualized that because then I'm like, oh, now the mob actually made more of an effect than I think they died thinking they did, which we can talk about a little bit more later. But that's basically where I'm at. I love both of those movies. I might like Kills a little more, which I know is not the consensus. But I'm a huge fan of both of them.
Absolutely. And Luke, your thoughts?
I mean, Michael, Halloween, my favorite slasher franchise. So, going into 2018, knowing there's a new property come out, obviously the level of excitement was unmatched for anything that could come out in the theater for me. And then going into it, looking at it, I felt like a lot of times they played it safe. And I know everyone looks at Ends and says, very unique take, very different. I think you set up that formula if you're going to do it more so in your original start of your trilogy so that it does have that feel rather than, getting into a form and then trying to switch it up later on. And I think like looking at that 2018, I think when you're writing something, you kind of, some things are met with an eye roll where it's like such a safe bet. Podcasters. I mean, not the most original kind of character trait for anything, where it's like, okay, it might as well be a reporter if you're going to go that route. So for me, I like just that element of it, I was pretty displeased with. And, the opening for me, weakest of this trilogy. And, I chuckle at the say something, that for me always gets a smirk. I can't take it seriously. And just that opening for me is a little problematic in a sense, just from the way it's presented. And, going into it, it was just a lot of unlikable characters, nothing that, I could really attach myself to. So overall, again, I wasn't pleased with that take on it. Now going into Kills, it's what I wanted. That opening, I mean, can't ask for anything better. If that would have been the opening of 2018, I think that would have set us on course for what we could have really had gotten. I think that was a perfect cold open from the original film, but they kind of waited, but they did nail it. And then kind of going into that one, that's what I wanted. That felt more closer to form of a Halloween film for me, where it was like, I just want Michael just mowing people down and going through the night, wreaking havoc on Haddonfield, everyone in an uproar. And I think we got that, and that ending does leave you wanting more. And I was excited to see that next installment. And then going into Halloweenends, I mean, I don't mind a year removal from the events. I think overall it's a kind of weakness in writing for me, where it's like, okay, we can't own the events. We don't know how to get ourselves out of what we've presented. So let's do a time jump. And again, they do present a very interesting idea. with Haddonfield, which we'll probably get into, and it's one of my biggest, again, ends is such missed potential, where it's like they present the idea of Haddonfield and the events of Michael wreaking havoc during Halloween Kills and how everyone's a little off. And I like that idea. If they would have presented it a little bit better, I think, we could have, had a really good film on our hands. But, going into that one, I think it was a weakness just removing us from a year. And then, I already said my piece on it, where I wanted more. I wanted more closure with our characters that we've seen from the first 2 installments. And I don't feel like we really got that.
Yeah. And just to surmise mine real quick, because I think I'm going to be saying the same thing you guys are. I walked into 2018 really amped, excited. I was ready to experience a Halloween film on the big screen, because for me it's like I'm also on the younger side here, with me being 25 now. So God, I would have been 19, 18. No, I would have been 19. And so I was young. I was there. I was ready to see it, and I walked out of that, and I was pumped. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I wanted to sit there and really enjoy it. But again, I think it comes into that element of almost like, okay, that was good. Yeah, I liked it. But then as Luke and I got out of the theater and started talking about it in the lobby, it's like, okay, yeah, that wasn't so great. That part wasn't. Okay, that part frustrated me too. And it's just kind of like the rose-colored glasses start to fall off a little bit. And yeah, I just had to get honest with myself and just say, okay, I don't think that one hit as well as I wanted it to. And then we get into Kills, went in with very low expectations, but I saw that directly after work, that's 7 p.m. Like, let's go Thursday night. I'm sitting there. I'm one of the only people towards the front of the theater, and that fucking cold open hits. And I just remember sitting there going, David, you've done it. You've done it, David. Like you've won me over. This is amazing. And the film continued, and I walked out of that, again, having a few criticisms, but I remember telling Luke, I think they're on the right path. I called him. I said, I think they're doing great. I think that this is going to be something you're going to enjoy. And I think we watched it. How many times did we watch that weekend? Because we were shooting a short film that never came to light. And when it was again on Peacock, so we watched it like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, because oddly enough, that's the film I never got to the theater. I saw 2018 in Ends in the theater, but never actually saw Kills. And I remember waking up very early because it was on Peacock, and I woke up as soon as it dropped on Peacock and watched it, and continuously watched it. I know I watched it, I think, over that weekend at least 3 times. I can pick out for sure.
It's such a breeze. It is one of those films that
so
I can
sit
down and throw it down. It's so consumable. It's so nice. It really does feel like that nice warm October cup of coffee in the morning to me. That's where I sit with Ends, or Kills I should say, because and it's so weird to hear people shit on that, and it's because I think that it's just so it's almost a detriment to itself, but it's harmless, it's doing what everybody loves that Michael does. He's killing. He's doing exactly what the title says. It gives you a banger cold open, and it keeps the night moving. It keeps the story going, and, you got a lot of great cast members in there who, performance wise, I think that the material some of them were given was a little weaker than others, but there's still a lot of fun in there. And yes, there are goofy moments. There are moments throughout this whole trilogy that I think David Gordon Green and Danny McBride really put too much of themselves into it. But, I think that overall I walked out of Kills very satisfied, very happy. And I was, again, like Luke, eager to see where Ends went. So I think unless there's any points you want to touch on here, Evan, we can move into our likes on Ends, and then subsequently our dislikes.
There is something that I noticed when you guys are talking about this. It seems like we had the opposite trajectory throughout this entire trilogy, which is really interesting to me. And it's probably quite relevant to the conversation, because it sounded like you guys were a little let down by 2018. And I loved 2018 when it came out. And then my expectations for Kills were fucking sky high. And then I really didn't like it. And then I went into Ends with really low expectations and ended up going back up and liking it. Now, Kills obviously changed, but when I first saw it, I didn't like it. So I found that interesting, that it seemed like we were like polar opposite trajectory.
Yeah,
for initial impressions.
It's definitely interesting to look at it like that because
Yeah.
I think it's also a part of this this fandom too, because like I do see, as for every person that I see who hates on kills, I see people who defend kills,
Yeah.
you know, who feel the same way we do. And I think all three of us, I like that that's a meeting point for us
Yeah.
in this trilogy. And I will say, like, I think I've grown fonder of 18 because of ends, because again, I think that kills and ends are closer to what I wanted. And you know, it's like, again, I am fine with people doing different things, but I think that just the timing was off for me with ends. And I'll get into that more
Yeah.
as we continue. But yeah, so why don't we start with our main likes? I know you're probably going to have a lot more, Evan, that you can go through, so I want to give you the floor. Just tell us, like, you know, a year post Halloweenends release,
Right?
You've examined the film. By the time this comes out, I don't necessarily know if your video's out yet, but you're working
I'm
on a
planning
massive...
on having it out on the release date.
Okay, great. So, you know, it's probably already out, but you know, you have a massive breakdown. I'm excited to see it, Lucas.
I just shot it
for it.
like right before coming on here. I just recorded that video, so
I'm really curious to see how your breakdown ties up. I'm gonna watch your videos in succession. I have it planned.
Great.
But like, tell us, where are you sitting with it?
So I want to ask first, after this, are we going to go through plot points, or am I going like, am I going to start talking about things specifically right now?
We can do plot points if you guys want to. If that would be a better thing, we can do that. Because, like, again, this is kind of free form. So it's
okay. So if it's free form, one thing I want to say, I'm going to go through kind of the movie somewhat chronologically and explain what I like about it. First thing, and I know that I'm already going to be throwing out some hot takes. I think this is the best cold open since the original movie, and it's not even a competition. The cold open for this movie absolutely blew my fucking mind. It is such a perfect tone setter from the second that you see the streets and the houses decorated so well and the kids in the costumes, and you get that Midnight Monster hop playing. Fantastic. I was very caught off guard by the different music there, because the last two had that very dark, ominous, like synth heavy thing, and then you got this sort of older, like fun Halloween song. I was like, oh, this is something different. And then immediately I'm just blown away by how the movie looks. It's shot so well. The music is incredible. And that open had such a strong atmosphere, and it felt like, obviously, you know, something's going to go wrong. And you kind of feel like you know what that's going to be. You're like, okay, Michael's going to come in. Something's going to be bad here. And then the way that it took its time to really slowly build that up to that moment of what happens with Jeremy Allen, I found to be so effective. That was one thing. Well, I liked the movie at first. That was one thing that I loved. So I was blown away by that. And then there's so much about the way that this movie was crafted that worked really well for me. I have criticisms of it, and part of that has to do with the consistency of the trilogy and the messiness of things not being properly developed or given enough time to breathe. There's a lot of issues with that. But the craft of what they were trying to do with this, I found to be so effective. As I was saying, the score is incredible. It's the best shot of the entire trilogy. Like the cinematography, lighting, framing, all of that is just on point. And then there are so many little script details in this movie that, especially on rewatches and as I've been analyzing it deeper, I've just been so enthralled by how many little things in that script are there that they're sneaking in to help try and, you know, support the points that they're making with the movie. Things down to the fucking glasses of chocolate milk that Corey drinks throughout the movie, or tries to drink, where, you know, in that scene with Jeremy, he gets a piece of banana bread and a cup of chocolate milk, and he doesn't get to drink that chocolate milk because Jeremy dies. And then later on, he tries to buy a bottle of chocolate milk, and the marching band kids like knock him over, and it breaks the thing. He doesn't get to drink it again. He keeps getting denied these like innocent pleasures because of this unfair way that he's being treated after this thing. He's being denied simple things that people should just be able to enjoy. So there's all sorts of things like that. And we can get into more things once we get really into the plot of the movie. Then I can talk about some more script details that I really like. But it's things like that. I found the reflective, contemplative approach that they took to the characters to be really emotional. Because after 2018 and Kills, I wouldn't have complained about it, but I don't know if I needed more mayhem from Michael Myers. Kills was kind of that like final crescendo of what I thought the boogeyman needed to be. So then taking a back seat and letting the characters, giving them more time to breathe in mostly good ways. Some of it I still think needed more time in the oven, but that more character-centric approach and the reflective nature of the movie overall worked really well for me, and the tone too. The atmosphere of it's very October, it's very Halloween. You get those exterior shots that are color graded perfectly to really get that feel, the sort of like dark brown look. It's just great. There's I mean I'll talk about things more specifically as we go on, but that's kind of how I feel about it overall. It's a very emotionally engaging, reflective experiment that I thought worked really well.
Okay, very fair, very fair.
And, for me, like, I know we're going to kind of say our piece with every little thing. I know Evan mentioned kind of a hot take on the cold opens there. But, like, for me, I totally understand where he's coming from, because it's like, looking at all three, you look at for Kills, I think that's like something where it's like, I can kind of compare it where it's, if you're hungry all day and you know what's going to be for dinner and you're looking forward to it all day, it's like, whatever, doesn't matter. I'm going to have whatever for dinner. And that's what I get. And when I sit down and I get it, I'm absolutely satisfied. And looking at being such a big fan of the original Halloween and getting that connector piece that we get in Kills, I think that's the equivalent of that. But it's like, not knowing what's going to be for dinner and being a toss up and then sitting down and getting something that you didn't know that you would really enjoy is the equivalent of Halloweenends. Because, I think when we sat down initially to do that review, and I may say it, I don't know if it's on there or not, but I know, because I completely, the opening for Ends made me forget initially the opening of Kills. And I said, this is like by far like the most jarring, I think it's such a strong cold open. And then I was quickly reminded, I think Dylan brought up, he liked Kills. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. But that's how, looking at Ends, I was like, oh man, this opening, I didn't know I needed something like this, but it really takes your anxiety level from just baseline to skyrocketing and wanting to know what this film's going to be. And that even going, when we get the Universal Studios thing and we're hearing the DJ and all those elements kind of go, I absolutely loved it, because it is such a different feel. And again, I think maybe that's where, as Evan was talking about, kind of the trajectory there, where I saw 2018, went in very hesitant for Kills, was satisfied with Kills, and all the promotional stuff for Ends kind of got me pumped up. And then even sitting in the theater and getting that that cold open, I was like, man, we're in for some wild shit here. And and then so my expectations immediately were up and wondering what we're going to get. And then, all those elements there, and I don't know if we're going to talk things, every little thing here, but like the DJ elements that's presented, I absolutely love that. And I think, again, when I said this film reeks of so much potential and just these grains of ideas, something like that, I think is perfect. Like, you could have really went farther, especially reading the novel of Halloweenends and knowing, and again, there's a piece where we can remove ourselves from those events of Kills, but there's a great connector piece in the novelization of Halloweenends that kind of goes a little bit farther with the end of Kills. I think would have been great to work some way into Ends if possible. But like the DJ element, the concept of Haddonfield kind of being off after all these events, I absolutely loved. It's something that I really wish they would have went farther with. And then, I think a lot of people take issue with the Corey Cunningham character, and his arc, for me, it does work to an extent, and kind of the elements of the subtleness, I guess, like like looking at it where he's being bullied by band kids, which is kind of an unorthodox element, but I think you look at that, especially Corey Cunningham being as old as he is and being bullied by band guys from. What are they? Are they seniors maybe? But it's like this kind of where he is on the totem pole of Haddonfield, where it's like, these high school band geeks in a sense are going to come and make fun of a grown man, you know. So there are a lot of elements in here that I think are really well done. It's just one of those things where I don't think they're expanded upon enough. But I think there is, looking at this film again, I get really excited for it because there is so much really great stuff here.
Yeah, and you know, I agree that the elements that we're talking about are good. I have to disagree that it's, again, the best opening since the first. I gotta give that to Kills. I'm sorry if that's the fanboy take or whatever, but I just, that was everything that I wanted out of 2018, at least the opening, because you know everybody has that idea of like how they would start a film like this when you're such a big fan, because everybody has their own vision of how they would make a Halloween film if you're a huge fan of Halloween. I think, you know, if you don't have the whole thing figured out, you've got elements. And of course, I would be remiss to not be like, we're going back to 1978, we're doing it, and it felt like somebody took a piece of my brain and put it on the big screen, and I will never forget that feeling. But this is a very impactful opening, and I do like it. I like the interplay between Corey and what's the kid's name again? Jeremy. Yeah. I like that. You know, I think that on subsequent rewatches, there's parts of it that just, I don't understand why Corey gets so upset and so freaked out being in the attic that he has to kick the door in. It's kind of one of those things that frustrates me, where it's just like, I just feel like, why would you be so like worked up about that? Why would you be so scared? Like, I know they're talking about Michael Myers, and I know that this is a town that's been through complete and utter hell, but it is one of those things where it's just like, to me, I feel like, I don't know. I just feel like there's little elements to it that do bug me when I watch it there, but I still agree. I think that it is a very impactful opening. It's very different than anything I think anybody expected going into it. And I gotta say, when that happened in the theater, I think Luke and I both looked at each other and said, hey, that was pretty good. I think they did a solid job there. And, you know, the Corey Cunningham character as a whole is a positive for me. It's something that, you know, I like his approach to it. I think that, you know, the actor did a great job. You know, and I think that he's somebody who, again, I'm sorry if I'm going to keep referencing Star Wars here, is someone who's going to get a lot of shit unnecessarily. Because I think Rowan Campbell, again, really did something special and fun with this character of just him kind of having a darkness consume him. And I know Luke is going to hate this, but I see why people compare it to Christine, because it is one of those things where it's like, you watch that movie, you see Arnie being consumed by darkness.
I think I see his ears bleeding.
Yeah. And so it's like, you know, it's just like it's just one of those things that I can appreciate that element. And again, I will be beating this statement like a dead horse, but I think that it's just one of those things where it's good, but again, you should have done this as your fourth film. You should have had this come be like almost like a prologue, where it's like, you know, you kind of have this or epilogue, sorry, and you know, it comes through at the very end, and you know, it's a little bit of where are they now after dealing with all of these elements. Because again, I think that, you know, for a trilogy that has been so consistent with its, you know, first part of the night, second part of the night, time jumps are fine, but like, it should really hinge on like almost a manhunt for Michael, in my opinion. I want this town to still be scarred, and you see those scars, and they do a good job of presenting them. One of the elements I think Luke and I talked about was just seeing all of the for sale signs around Haddonfield and stuff like that. Those are nice details. I appreciate stuff like that. You know, for the most part, I do like Jamie Lee Curtis in this. I think that she's serviceable. I think that, you know, they do some goofy things with her that just don't feel consistent with even her character in this trilogy. But I just kind of feel like they didn't really. I feel like they were like, we need to bring Jamie Lee back to make this trilogy happen, but they didn't have an exact plan on how they were going to handle it, because I think that like she is very inconsistent throughout these three films. I think that she's, you know, obviously driven and paranoid in the first film. The second film, it's tough to gauge because she's in the hospital the whole time, but she's very militant, very much in and out. So, I can give that a pass. But this one, she's moved on. She's healed. I get it for the fact of like, oh, she finally realizes that Michael had no interest in her. Her boogeyman was never really, it was her all along. I get that. But like, it's one of those things to me where it's just kind of like, your daughter was butchered by this man. And like, he killed your son-in-law, even if you didn't like him. It's like, your granddaughter is living with you now. Her whole life is ruined. And you're just like, I'm moving on. I'm fine. I'm good. Everything's cool. It just, to me, it was like, I don't know. But yeah, I think that it's, again, beautifully shot. I think that's throughout the entire trilogy. I think there's a lot of positives there. And really, I got to say, I think like the whole first 2 acts of this film, I really enjoy. This movie really doesn't fall apart with me on my watch now until probably about the end of the second act into the third. I just think like that's when it really just can't decide if it wants to finish Michael's story or continue Corey's story. And that's, where I sit with it.
Yeah. I think the best way that I can describe it, because I also reflect that idea of like, there should have been another movie here. Ends is a good epilogue, but it's a weird conclusion. And the way that I've started viewing this timeline that we have, which is the original movie and the 3 new ones, is, and I described this in my video probably a little more eloquently than I will here, but that first movie is like a myth. It's this story that kids in Haddonfield tell each other around campfires about this white masked boogeyman in 1978. You can hear Tommy tell it. That's how people tell that story. They tell it in this very dramatized, mythical way because that's how they remember it. That's what time does. And then 2018 in Kills, I see as one long movie, as the final night of the boogeyman. This thing where he returns after 40 years and Laurie thinks she gets him, but she kind of ignites this beast inside of Michael that we haven't seen before. And he then just rips through the town and leaves them bloodied. And that's what 2018 in Kills are. And then Ends is the epilogue. You were saying that it's an epilogue. That's exactly how I see it. I see this very much as a 3-act story of that myth, the return, and the epilogue. And I find that to be a very interesting way of presenting the story, because I can't think of another horror franchise that has done something like this. It's different, and it's not going to work all the time. For very valid reasons, it's not going to work for people. But I think for what this is, even with its flaws, I still found that to be a fascinating way of presenting this story overall. In terms of Laurie, it's a very interesting character arc here, because as you were saying, in 2018, she's very paranoid and defensive, and has kind of allowed the rest of her life to deteriorate out of fear for preparing for what she saw as the inevitable return of Michael Myers and him coming after her and putting her family in danger. And then in Kills, she realizes it didn't work, and we didn't get to do much with her in Kills, which was unfortunate. In Ends, I don't see it at all as her being like, oh, I'm fine now, I'm just going to move on. I see it as her being terrified of what her paranoia did to the people around her, because she almost inadvertently brought Michael to that point where he became more dangerous than he would have been if she might have not intervened, because I think that fire fucking did something. That set something off in him. We can see it right away how much more brutal he is when he comes out of there. And she sees that she brought Karen and Michael together. So it's probably a lot of guilt and fear. That's part of the reason I'd imagine that she's living with Allison, is because she doesn't want to let her out of her sight. She's trying to put on this facade of looking like she's okay, like everything's all right. She's making pumpkin pies and she's carving jack-o'-lanterns, she's putting up decorations, but you can see hints that she's not at all okay, and that she's just full of this remorse and this guilt. And in bits where when Sandra's sister sees her outside of the grocery store and she attacks her, and then Laurie just breaks down crying in her car because she's like, you're right, that's how she feels. What her sister said, she's like, yeah, I did that, and I don't think she is okay. I think she's very much not okay, but she's trying to hold it together to almost as an apology to Allison for bringing everything together in the way that she did. And then, of course, there's the way that Michael's handled, which I'm sure that we all have lots to say about, because he was Halloween Kills. I think even people who hate that movie agree that that is maybe the best Michael Myers since that original movie. Certainly the coolest looking.
Yeah.
But those two movies utilized him in such a good way. He was so good. James Jude Courtney gave such a perfect performance, and the look, like the mask and everything about it was just on point. And then Ends, it's this wildly different thing where he's weak, he's old, he's brittle, he's frail. And that's a really weird thing to see. It's a hard pill to swallow. And I remember sitting in the theater just being like, it's almost uncomfortable seeing him weak like that, seeing him get beat up by Corey, seeing him tag teaming with him at Dr. Mathis's house. Things like that. It's just bizarre. But then I also think, I'm like, I always get a weird feeling in slasher movies, which is fine. It's part of the genre. But you'll have the killer who's this really brutal, strong, powerful, unbeatable thing. And then by the end, when they have to go up against the final girl, all of a sudden they can't do shit. They lose any of that power. So seeing him, for me, him being weakened by what the mob did and then rotting away in the sewer, I was like, this is actually a setup that I really like, because now it makes it, for me, more digestible that Laurie can take him on now. It's less of this like mythical thing, and now it's a fight that I don't have to suspend my disbelief for as much as I would with a lot of slasher movies, because he's already been weakened. And I also buy it. He is in his 60s at this point, and he took a hell of a beating in Kills, which is fine. Like, I don't mind him surviving that at all. I think that's great, because Michael is capable of things that most people aren't. Then there's that whole conversation about whether or not he's supernatural, which is something else we can get into. But yeah, I found that weird and uncomfortable, but also very fitting, both thematically and narratively. So I'll move on for now. We'll loop back around to other points, but I don't want to take up too much.
No, it's okay. You're bringing up good points, and we can all kind of go piece by piece here and digest it. So, Luke, you have the stage now, sir.
Oh, okay. For me, I think I struggle with the disjointedness of, what we all went in 2018. He's a guy. He's just a killer. We're going back to basics. And then that odd take of now we're throwing the supernatural element into it. Because, like, for me, I really do enjoy the design of Halloweenends. I love that mask. I think it is, like, for me, out of the three, I think that's my favorite, just because it is so different with, like, the mold on it. And it's just so unique. I have it actually off screen here staring at me. But for me, for my money, that was something that stuck out in my head as soon as we saw that trailer. I was like, that is a really unique design for Michael. But then, you struggle with that because you kind of backpedal, and now we're getting into the supernatural element, which I've never been against, but we're kind of going back and forth. And I think that portion feels a little disjointedness of the trilogy as a whole, where Dylan brought up, we kind of want that conclusion in that third installment. And, whether you're on board with David Gordon Green doing 2018 or not, you entered into an agreement with David Gordon Green to watch this trilogy, so you think, just as any screenwriter does, beginning, middle, and end, we're going to do that throughout three films. And, that third film, yes, you did try to do something different. I don't know necessarily if that's the time you start pulling the trigger on that. Because, again, it does feel disjointed in terms of everything that we had wanted coming out of that. But, I think those scenes with Michael, in terms of, I understand, he's getting his power back and stuff. And, I think it's uncomfortable in a sense, but then it almost flips a switch. When Corey and Michael are wrestling for the mask back and forth, is for me always a comical moment, because it just doesn't feel genuine to me. It just feels like so forced. And I know when we had been at the theater, there were chuckles of just this fight between Corey Cunningham and Michael Myers. And I think that's something, you know, as being whether, you know, because I know 2018 got a lot of fans from, you know, probably hadn't seen any of the other installments and just went in to see a masked slasher. And, you know, kind of going into that is like Michael's your guy going into it, whether you've seen the past films or not. You're on board with him slashing people up, and then you have a new character, Corey Cunningham, coming in, and now he's besting your guy, and it's just like, for that, I think it's tough for people to get on board with.
Yeah, and you know, I think that some of the points you brought up there, Evan, are actually pretty good to think about, at least like as I'm processing them here. And you know, I think that your interpretation of this trilogy, especially in the way they handle Michael, is having him come out of the fire and, you know, be that rabid dog. I like that. I like that element to it, and that does feel very purposeful, and that feels like, you know, really solid to me. And I do like the idea of Michael being kind of decrepit and being old and being worn down in the sewer. You know, I like that in theory. I like that, you know, that he can be bested by somebody who's just a guy. Where I think we lose a little bit, and which they do really well in the novel, and I know Luke brought this up a little bit ago, is the opening of the novel showing the events directly after kills.
So good.
Yeah, it's like it's a really well interpretation. It would show almost the, like, how he stands back up. You know, he comes out of the fire, the supernatural elements that is always kind of surrounding Michael, no matter what you say, no matter what they tried to set up in 18, you know, it's always going to be there. I don't think you can do this character without it. But I always like that it's the implication of it. You know, it's not that it's something we have to dive into. And so, like, when he comes out of it and he goes through kills and then he gets bested by the mob, but then, you know, overcomes it in like this last burst of complete rage and violence. I would have liked to have seen that cold opening. I think that would have made, I think that would have vastly improved ends in the interpretation of Michael in a lot of ways, because it would have shown the slow, like, progression of, because he's just sitting on the side of the road, and he could be like breathing heavy. He could be like, you know, like, I guess wheezing more because he's always breathing heavy. But you know, it's like one of those things where it's like he could have been wheezing, he could have been limping. You could have seen, okay, something's taking a toll here.
Yeah,
like maybe he's losing it a little bit. And then when you see him in the sewer, and you know, he goes to kill the sheriff guy, the deputy. When he goes to kill him, and he needs, and like him and Corey have to team up. Yeah, like that could have really been more effective, and I think it would have been better than getting the laughs that it got for us in the theater of seeing him kind of seize up and wiggle a little bit, being like, "Oh man, I got my powers back." Like, you know, it's like, you know, it's like little touches like that I think if they just would have taken a step back and spent a little bit more time keeping Michael as our main focus, really. Like, you can tell this Corey story and this Allison story, you know, that's great. I love it, like, in the sense of just where it could have gone. But like, I feel like you got two ideas for a film here and one gets severely lost, and that's unfortunately Michael's side.
Yeah, I want to touch on the supernatural thing for a second, because it's a very important talking point with how, like, the way that you interpret that is going to change how you see this whole storyline. 2018 did have supernatural elements for Michael. When they pull out the mask immediately and everyone around is freaking out because they can feel that, the energy of that, there's something there. We don't know what that is, but there's something there. And that was in 2018. And then Kills brought it out more. He was obviously able to survive a lot of things that a normal person wouldn't be able to. There's all sorts of supernatural things in Halloween Kills. How did he get up into the bedroom of the Myers house after the mob beat down? How did he get there? It's this ghostly presence. And then, but it's still not certain. But then there's a scene in Ends that will dictate, your interpretation of it will dictate what you the way that you interpret Michael. And that's the initial interaction with Corey and him, where there is that transformation that happens with Corey. So then the question with that scene is the flashes that we see of what happened with Jeremy and the marching band kids, is that in Corey's head or is that in Michael's head? And I think that's the biggest question with the supernatural element of this movie. Because if you see that as Michael seeing what's in Corey and kind of like testing him, like, are you a good fit for this to carry on with what I'm doing, and then transferring something into him, then it's supernatural and there's no debate about it. But then again, you could see it as that's inside of Corey's head, and he's looking into Michael's eyes, and we've seen throughout this trilogy that something happens to people when they look into his eyes. Laurie saw it in 1978. She was obviously changed by that. Tommy saw it right before he died. You can see the look on his face when that happens, where he's realizing what he's actually up against. Allison saw it at the end of Kills, right before he throws her down the stairs. He grabs her head and he looks her right in the eye, and then he throws her. And she's now been totally altered by that. She's finding comfort in people like Doug Mulaney, who are complete dog shit people, but he's a cop, so she feels safe with him. So there's all these sorts of things. And then Corey sees that, and maybe that's then triggering him to go back and think about all of these things that have happened. And it could be that whatever thing is driving Michael is there in people. And that thing in his eyes brings something out. And what I realized is that I think there is something in Corey that's even hinted at earlier on. When he first gets to that gas station to buy his chocolate milk, the vagabond who's under the overpass when around Michael's cave is there. And as Corey comes by, the vagabond slowly turns his head, like he's noticing something about him. And this guy is very drawn towards Michael. We learn a lot more about that in the novelization, which I think is such a cool backstory for that character.
So good.
It's so good. So then when I hear that and I see him kind of like turn his head, like, what's that? When Corey comes by, it's like there's something in Corey that's also in Michael. So I don't see that scene as Michael transferring something to him. That's the soundtrack there is called Transformation. It's not called Transference. I think that was something that was always in Corey that was then brought up at a tipping point after seeing that evil in Michael's eyes. So I think there is a supernatural element to Michael, and that's been in the trilogy the whole time. But I don't think it's this like superpower thing where it's, you know, he's like sending something to Corey. I saw that as him awakening something that was already there.
And I know we were talking about, you know, these cold opens and the novelization, how it varies from Halloweenends here. And I always talk, you know, I mentioned several times already, missed opportunities and so much potential in here. And I think for me, and I want to see how you guys feel about it, is almost this melding. Because I always see this as, how did you not do this? Opening up with Corey and everything. And this would mess with the timelines just slightly. In terms of those events of that night with Jeremy. When he's looking for Jeremy, he goes outside. And what if Michael is across the street? All beat the hell up after Halloween Kills. This is on his journey after getting away from that mob, and he's just walking. And he's beat to shit, and him and Corey lock eyes. Now, as what Evan's saying there's this kind of, not necessarily a transformation, but it would re-rack itself when they eventually have that meeting later on, and that would kind of almost slightly awaken something into Corey. And then that leads to the events of Jeremy out. That would heighten his nervousness in terms to kick open that door and to want to be freaked out because he just saw a masked man. And I think especially this idea of that event happens, we see Michael. Corey doesn't see Michael for a very long time. And then when he, after the events and goes into the sewer, it's like this omen. It's this guy that's going to trigger everything into him. And I think that would be way more effective of this melding of the novelization as well as Halloweenends and kind of tie everything back in and make that sewer scene when Corey does finally see Michael way more effective.
I like the take. Yeah, I think that like it would definitely have been that kind of connective tissue that we need I think for some of us, I think that it's definitely something where it's like, it is no secret too. And I think like watching this most recent viewing, I went in being very open-minded. We did go into, Halloweenends a bit skeptical, but again, optimistic because we like kills. But, it's one of those things that's kind of been the butt of the joke for us, this, entire trilogy for Luke and I, of just like, oh man, like, because Halloween 2018 was such a, meh for us that we were kind of like, can we really trust it? There's always been that distrust. So, it's kind of like, I don't know. It just the reason I bring that up is because it's like there are elements to this that, as you're talking, Evan, and you're bringing up, it's like I do see that and I do appreciate it. And I think that, you talking about just the supernatural element of Michael, I think there's a lot of debate out there about just how this trilogy handled it. But I think the way you saw it, and it does reaffirm for me that I think that, could there have been some tweaking to it to make it a little bit more clear? Yes, but I think that it is well handled. I do think that, for Luke not being a big fan of 2018's opening, it does establish that supernatural element, and I do again really enjoy the idea of it just amping up, and then kind of, falling to the wayside in ends with him kind of like losing a little bit of that until, Corey gets him to kill again, or he transfers a little bit of that, or he almost unlocks something for Corey. And I think it does harken back a little bit, although I do think they kind of get lost in their own sauce a little bit when they wrote this. But it does kind of harken back to what Carpenter wanted for Michael, where he is just the embodiment of evil. So seeing whatever's in his eyes is just pure evil. Like that's what you're looking at. You're seeing the devil in a sense, and it's just like I can appreciate that angle, but again, I just think that as if I look at this trilogy objectively and how it's kind of been presented and how things have gone, you don't really I don't blame anybody for not sitting here and watching these three films and not getting that until you've really looked into it. And I think that that's a problem. I think that that's a problem with a lot of people, is to where they don't really know. They feel like they're being kind of pulled in a lot of different directions. And I'm sorry, not all of us are, even some horror fans aren't big nerds like us that are going to dive into this and read the novelization and, sit here and debate this stuff. And it's just like, so it's one of those things where it's like, if you're going to really make this work, I think that you need to have a more clear approach and a vision for that. And it needs to at least be somewhat, mapped out. And I think that, again, it's an issue that I kind of have with a lot of how these trilogies in a lot of fandoms have recently gone, where it's like, this doesn't necessarily feel like a consistent trilogy to me, where it's like we have a path and then we divert. We try to fix things, try to please both sides. It's kind of like, I think that there should have been, and I know this is kind of the way it was. So initially, this was supposed to be 2 films as far as the Halloween reboot here.
Yeah.
And they were told to just do 1 film. And then when it did numbers, obviously, and did great, and everybody loved it, they were like, okay, now, what do you want to do? You want to do another movie? And he's like, well, let me do a trilogy. So it's like, that wasn't the idea. That wasn't the pitch. And I'm all good for them growing, and they had the time to do it. But I just don't know if, sitting there and like, making that, like, and I think of this as like a creative, as a writer too. It's just like, I need to make sure that there's an expectation of like my beginning, my middle, and my end. And I just feel like the ending here is just, again, did they get bored? Did they not like what the take? Did they feel like they had to do something vastly different from where the story was going? Did they kind of lose focus? And I think that one of the comments that David Gordon Green made that I saw before this film came out was that he was ready to get out of Haddonfield. He was done with Michael through the pandemic and everything. Like, he spent more time on this trilogy than he initially planned. And, I think that he was ready to go do Exorcist. He was ready to go do something, different. slightly. And you know, it's like I think that you can see that in this film, where it's like he's like, I'm gonna take a swing, and if you don't like it, I don't care.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a big sticking point for a lot of people. And I know I kind of divulged from the evil, the shape, all that to this, but you know, I just wanted to get all that out. So
yeah, it's weird, man. It's a very weird trajectory. I think the consistency would be my biggest criticism for sure. Is that the trilogy tonally is very inconsistent, even from 2018 to Kills. They feel like such different movies from the way the dialogue is written and the way it's shot and the sound of it. It's totally different. Kills is so much more campy than 2018. And then I just found going into Ends, it was more of this just like character driven, like well written thing with so many script details that I found fascinating. And I think that does come down to how committed people are going to be to try. Like, if you're not a fucking nerd, you're not going to be interested to do this. You're going to go see the movie. You're going to go, that was fucking stupid. And you're not going to think about it again. But I'm a Halloween nerd and I'm a film nerd. And I find it really exciting that there's a Halloween movie that I'll spend months going, what do I think is going on here? How am I interpreting this? Now, it's not something that's going to work for everyone. Which is why I say in my review a bunch of this, very subjective, because it's going to depend on where you're coming at the angle you're approaching the movie from. I just find it really exciting that I can talk about a Halloween movie like this and theorize about what I think this means and what I think that means, and look at all these little bits of symbolism and visual storytelling. And that, for me, I find really interesting. And I guess I'll give another example of what I meant with the script, because I brought up the chocolate milk thing, which is so funny that I found that to be significant. But then there's also that moment after Corey kills the vagabond where he and Allison are talking and he goes, I killed someone. And then she takes his hand, they go to the house. And I saw a lot online where people are like, why the fuck would she do that? He just told her that he killed someone. Yeah, that's a weird reaction for that to have, but I don't think that Allison was at all thinking that he's going, hey, I just murdered the homeless guy. Yeah. That's him showing her, I'm opening up to you about what happened with Jeremy. And what I love about that moment is that it is bone chilling, because you have that thing where it's like, okay, he's opening up to her, they're about to become more intimate, but also he's kind of telling her as well that, or he's subtly slipping in that I did just kill someone. I just murdered a human being. So that simultaneous realization of, oh, they're about to get way closer and more intimate, and, oh, he's getting really dangerous. It's moments like that for me in Ends. I honestly, at this point, I can look past the consistency because I don't mind thinking about it so much. I love filling in those blanks. That is subjective. That is not, I cannot use that as a defense for the movie because it holds absolutely no weight. That's entirely a personal thing that I like doing with this. But I find it's weird, but the movie we got just worked. But I'm sure we'll be getting into ending talk relatively soon, and we're going to have plenty to say about that. Because I know we don't have forever to talk about it.
No, and I think that we've definitely warranted a potential another video later on down the line of us meeting again with this topic. But I think Luke, do you have any of the points that have been brought up? Do you have anything you want to wrap up there, and then we'll talk the ending, and then we'll talk about the legacy, and then call it.
I think one of the issues that people run into, and I think the character of Corey Cunningham, I'm on board with to a certain extent. I think sometimes as we go through that arc, it's a couple of missteps, and I know it's been kind of the running joke that this is compared to Christine a lot. Like, looking at it, you have Arnie and Dennis in Christine, and I think that trajectory of the Arnie character being obsessed with a car, supernatural car, and that take of him starting off as just a high school nerd, and then he's being taken over by that spirit of the car, and maybe it's driver at one time, and he gets this change. And I think that that works because we're seeing that change, not necessarily through Arnie's eyes, but more so through Dennis's. And we have this character, again, the way those characters are handled, I think everyone can resonate with them. You're on board. You want to be part of that group. You love the dynamic between your high school geek and your all-star jock. And I think it just works. Whereas with the Corey Cunningham character, there are moments in there where I feel not on board with him, where it's like at the opening, I really enjoy him. When we get to the dancing scene between him and Allison, I think we kind of fall into an awkward space. And I think we continue with sometimes you're on board with Corey, sometimes you're not. Like, I think that character in general, the way he's written sometimes can come off almost annoying, where, where they're on top of the radio station and he's kind of joking around. Like, those types of scenes for me, have me struggle with that Corey character, where I don't necessarily find his trajectory 100% genuine, where it does seem where he's on the motorcycle. Sometimes it feels a little forced for me. And, us having to go through the film very much into the Corey Cunningham camp character and saying, okay, this is a character we're seeing a lot through the eyes of, especially when you want it to be Jamie Lee Curtis for most of that film. I think people cannot get on board with. And I think especially changing it up, he's not established in those first two films, which is an issue for a lot of people. Coming in with this new character and trying to get on board. You have a lot of legwork to do before we even see Michael. And I think that is, again, where an issue for me lies and for a lot of people.
I agree with that. I think that's another big hang up that I can side with, is that although I've grown to really like the Corey Cunningham character in the kind of the facet that I view him in, and it seems like Luke does too, where it's just kind of like, we can get past some of these arbitrary issues, that, when looking past it and kind of going at the more, investigative eye, yeah, we can enjoy stuff like that. But yeah, I think that it's totally fair to throw it at the feet of these filmmakers and say, why did you wait so long to throw a character like this in there? Like, you could have easily just had him been part of the friend group who kind of got lost into it. And then kind of going back to Luke's little pitch there, it's like, wouldn't it have been great to have him kind of like be there through the events of 2018, and then you don't see him in Kills, and then you find out that he's been babysitting the night of Halloween, Kills, or 18 Kills, and that moment, and then we see him after the events of the opening, and then it's like, there we go. So it's like, I think that would have been a much cleaner trajectory to have a little bit of an established relationship between him and Allison. It wouldn't have been so abrupt and seemingly like she's almost because I don't know if I've seen this flung at it, but like, that's another thing that kind of bugs me a little bit about the film. It's minor, but the fact that Allison sees this guy one time and is just like, yeah, I'm gonna fuck that. She's like, I'm on. She just comes off very sexually aggressive, just like, yeah, I want a piece of that.
I think I described it in my video that she optically fucks him.
Yeah, right.
As soon as he comes into the hospital. It's a point that's obviously a big thing of contention, of like, she fell for him so quickly.
But again, I could see the point of, she is just looking for something different. She's looking for love. She's looking for a way out,
Well, the way that I actually saw that, there are lots of things in the movie that bothered me the first time that I then like thought about and reconciled with. That's one I never had an issue with, because the way that I always saw that was that both of them went through something horrible on Halloween night that caused the town and the people around them to see them and treat them differently. And then he comes in and she's like, I get it. Here's someone who's going to understand that weird, isolated feeling. It's like a trauma bonding thing, is basically the way that I saw that. And, then you have that interaction with them outside the hospital, which I've always really liked. I found that to be a really sweet scene. But, you see it all the time in movies where, like, there's a guy at a diner or whatever, he likes a waitress, and then they're together the next day. It happens all the time. But I found that very digestible, just because the way that I saw that was that it was just the two of them bonding over that shared experience. And that can do a lot of heavy lifting very quickly.
Yeah, and I definitely, I get that too. I just think that, like, it is something that, once you are willing to set your differences aside to it, but I think like again it takes the initiative. It's another part that takes the initiative to peel back and want to dive into it, because again, like, people will be shut off by a lot of things in this movie.
Yep.
And we were, for sure. Like, I think in our initial review, that's why we're so harsh, but it's like we've kind of had to force ourselves to dive into it a little bit more, especially for this, to prep for this, but also just in general as time has gone on. So let's talk about the ending, though, because I know this is another controversial piece for people. I think, Evan, we'll let you say your piece first, and we'll just keep the rotation moving, and then we'll talk legacy.
There's one thing I want to there's one scene in specific I want to talk about with the ending. That's one of my favorite scenes of the entire franchise. Then I'll get into some more general thoughts about the ending. But that scene where right after Allison storms out and Laurie goes upstairs, and it's that whole sequence where she's getting the gun and she calls in the suicide report. I love how that was executed, because the whole time, I don't know if you guys were like fell for it. I was like, I didn't think she was going to kill herself. I was like, Jesus, this is like, I thought she was kind of getting to that point. I was very emotionally invested. So I see her, I'm like, man, she looks so broken. She's going up the stairs. She looks afraid and alone. And then she lights the jack-o'-lantern like she's going, all right, you win. And then she calls in this suicide. It's like, Jesus Christ. And then Corey shows up, and, you see the splatter, the gunshot and all that. And then you realize, no, she wasn't doing any of that. But what I love about how they crafted that, which is like the very beginning of that third act of the movie, right where things start to get really crazy, is that scene. What I really like about that is that whole scene is recontextualized once you see what was actually going on. Because you realize she wasn't walking up the stairs sad and afraid of killing herself. She saw something outside the house, or she felt something. She felt the presence of whatever Michael brings. And she goes up, and she's not saying you win with lighting the jack-o'-lantern. She's saying, fucking bring it on. Let's go. And then she's calling in this suicide because she knows that Corey's there, and if she calls in something serious, he's going to come in and attack right now. She needs to set this up properly. And she wants him to feel like he has to rush upstairs because she's going to do it herself, but he wants to be the one to do it. And then just that whole bait and switch of like, where just that whole moment was completely recontextualized. I love how they crafted that. I thought that was just fantastic. The ending is one of the most controversial parts of the movie for a lot of reasons. Corey dies. And so then in a lot of ways, it kind of is like, okay, so what was the point? Why would we even spend any time doing that? Because we're just throwing it away at the end. And I get that. But for me, it doesn't bother me, because I don't care to see Corey continue on as a Michael Myers copycat. I don't need to see any more movies with that. I liked this, but I don't need to see it continue. And I felt like the point of Corey Cunningham's character, I would have liked to see him set up in the other two. That's a big problem for sure, that he was just completely absent for them, that shows up in this one. The point of his character was to give David Gordon Green a canvas to explore the nature of something like Michael Myers without demystifying him as a character. There are so many of these movies that have tried to explore what is it that drives him, why does he do this. You get things like Halloween 6 with the fucking Cult of Thorn, you get the sibling relationship or whatever. There's so many different times that this has worked. I don't think it's ever worked well. And then Ends comes along, and it uses this exterior thing to explore that without making Michael, without taking away the mystery, the mystery of what I find so compelling about that character. So the fact that I didn't care to see it carried on, and that I felt like Corey served his purpose for the story, I didn't mind seeing him get killed off. And then you've got the fight. Obviously, you've got the fight between Laurie and Michael, which is too short. And that's my biggest problem with it, because that was really well choreographed. I really enjoyed the whole battle between them. And also that moment when Allison comes in and sees Laurie holding the knife and Corey's on the floor. Love it. So impactful.
I thought you were going to talk about the, sorry to interrupt, but I thought you were talking about when she comes in, she's like, no, and stops him in the kitchen. I was like,
no,
that's
I will get to that.
Poor delivery. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I was talking about when she first came in and Corey's on the floor. I love that moment. But then, so the fight plays out, and there's things that are set up there, like the microwave exploding food and the fire extinguisher being in the cabinet. So it just doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere. I like that they got sort of that setup payoff, you know, establish something in the first act, make it explode in the third act. So I appreciated that. But the fight itself was, I found satisfying, although not long enough. You got things like the knitting needle, which were cool to see come back, and the little garbage disposal nod to H2O, which they have to do one of these days because now it's been teased twice and I want to see it. And then you get that sort of flash where Laurie's got him pinned down. I love how she's hammering knives in with pans and shit and just locking him down. And then you get the flashback, which made me tear up in the theater. I won't even lie to you. That was very emotional for me, seeing that. And then you get to the procession, which I can see the faces already, where people laugh at that scene. So many people find it really funny. And that's another one of those moments, like with Allison and Corey's relationship, where I'm like, that's so not how I interpreted this at all. I found, and I can see you've got shit to say about it, but that for me, strapping him to the top of a car and like driving him around the town where people are following, that was such a powerful moment of like, we got him. Because this whole trilogy was focused on the effects of Michael on Haddonfield. That was the biggest point of what they were doing with this. So then to have this moment where the whole town is part of this, like, of this procession of just showing him off, we finally fucking got this guy, was so powerful for me. And the epilogue of the movie, but one of my favorite, one of the best endings to me, that whole sequence, I absolutely loved it. When Allison leaves, I love that conclusion for her character. I'm like, that seems right. I don't think she would stick around after this. And then the thing with Frank and Laurie, which, like, I am so on board with that at this point. And the idea of them going to Japan to just look at cherry blossoms together, I'm like, this is beautiful. This is so emotional. I love how he brings the thing and he's acting like he's about to leave, but he's just standing on the sidewalk, like waiting for her to invite him over. I love that detail. And then the ending, like the final few shots, are exactly what I wanted. The movie is not, on a whole, is not exactly what I'd wanted going into it, but those final few shots are perfect because the ending of the original Halloween might be my favorite ending to a horror movie ever, where you get those static shots of empty houses and quiet streets, and the theme is playing, and it's just this eerie thing, and then the theme kicks in. But then here you have those still shots, but there's no music. It's just a bright, sunny house, November 1st, and the birds are chirping outside. That was really impactful. And then you get Don't Fear the Reaper, which is, from what I can tell, the last song that Laurie listened to before Michael tore her life apart. And now it's coming back around again after she's finally truly rid herself of that thing that haunted her for so long. So the ending has issues, but I get really emotional with it every single time. And I find it to be fantastic, even though it's very inconsistent. With this whole thing is inconsistent, the whole storyline, but what we have works for me.
Good. Yeah, and for me, I have problems with the third act, obviously. Like, it just feels like it's shoehorned in. It's we had that third act in an original script, and then we reworked the first two acts, but had to find connective tissue, and we didn't change anything about the third for the most part. Again, my brain goes in different areas with it. I think there could have been, multiple. I think I've pitched this before. Multiple Michaels in an event held by the DJ. I think would have been an interesting take on it, because Michael doesn't have his mask up until he gets it back from Corey. I think for me, going into Corey showing up and Laurie faking her suicide. I mean, for me, I didn't buy into it. One of the big reasons was, you know, it was played in the trailer of what exactly opening the door, her with the gun. We kind of knew what we were in for before she even made that call, I think, because we were all kind of expecting that scene. You know, and then we get that a little bit of a showdown between Corey and Lori. And while I do think like Allison walking in was effective, I think more so it would have been intriguing to have Michael kill Corey in some fashion, because, you know, that was the dynamic between the actual physical dynamic where Lori believes Michael's out there and she's also having an issue with Corey. But I think Michael dispatching Corey would have been an interesting take on it. And then, yeah, I agree that when we got into this, the bread and butter is Lori versus Michael, and that's what we all want to see. And I feel like just it's very abrupt. Yes, the fight is short, but I think we should have had that drawn out. You know, Lori, I think there should have been more ceremony with Lori seeing Michael, because, hey, she did see him way back in the day. She hadn't seen him since the events of him killing her daughter. And I think there should be a little more ceremony there and draw that out to let the audience, again, we can't digest it properly, I don't think, where it's all happens so abrupt. They're meeting for the first time, we get through the fight, and then Michael's dead. And it's just, you know, I think it left me wanting more closure, I think. And then, yeah, when we get tying him to, you know, the top of the police vehicle and sending him through the town, I think, you know, I think there was better ways to do that for me. You know, it seemed like a way for us to be like, hey, remember all those characters we forgot? Hey, they're showing up here. Look, it's the kid from the first one.
Seeing Barker pissed me off. Why the fuck is he in these movies?
Yeah. And again, it just seemed like that end seemed like we didn't get closure with a lot of the characters. Yeah. And it was just like, we need to bring everyone back. We need to get, again, we entered an agreement with David Gordon Green in 2018. And we thought we were going to see closure for every character, not just a random bartender spot where we're just talking and kind of facilitating a more story about Corey. It's like, I thought we were going to get some closure, especially with the events that Michael ensued with these characters. And we were going to get, you know, some sort of satisfying conclusion. Again, it feels shoehorned where we just get more closure between Lori and Michael. And even that seems unsatisfying. I think, you know, am I a fan of, you know, that fight night idea that Michael's gone? You know, there's always going to be more Halloween films, so why put that closure on it? I think it would have been interesting if, again, we rework things. If we kept the mask on Michael as he's being chaperoned through the town before we put him in the grinder of sorts, we take it off and it's Corey, and Michael is just out there again, and we don't get that closure, and it just ends up like in the original. Hey, evil's still out there. We're never going to be happy because real life is evil's never gone. So I think, like, again, this thing shows so much potential, and, you know, being wanting to write screenplays and everything, you can't help but where your mind goes. And it's just one of those things where when I get removed from this film, I think there's and I go back to it, I think it could be a better film than it is. And then again, it reignites all the missed potential for me. So the ending for me, while we did get Michael versus Lori, it just felt a little unsatisfying for me.
And, you know, I think that you guys all hit a lot of important points with this ending. And, you know, it's not to rehash everything. I'll go through the points, though, real quick, of just like, okay, I like the Lori suicide thing. I thought that was fun not fun, but like, you know, I thought that was you know, an interesting idea to like set it up, but again, the trailer does ruin it. And then, you know, I liked the idea of her and Corey kind of having that back and forth, and I would have liked to have almost seen a little bit of sympathy start to wield in from Corey as he's like, you know, say he gets super injured, say he falls off the balcony steps, just like Jeremy did, and then he, you know, is like really messed up, like severely, and like he's almost like snapping back to like, oh my god, like what is happening, and has kind of like a heart-to-heart with Lori, so that Lori can kind of see like, okay, like you weren't all bad, you know what I mean? But I mean, that's not the film we got. The fight is too short, and yeah, the procession scene I don't have an issue with it really, I don't think it's like the worst idea. I think that, again, if this is all taking place on one night, it would have been way more effective to have the remnants of the town kind of take their boogeyman and, dump them. And I get like it's the scarred people, it's the people over time and everything. But I just think like it went from us finally going it like we've had this story this whole time with Corey and Michael and all this, and then we finally get what the movie has been leading up to, which is the very interpersonal final battle with Laurie and Michael, and it's super short. And then the ending is just we're throwing them in the meat grinder with everybody around us. And I do actually like the ending with Frank and Laurie. I think that they've been wonderful this entire time. I love Frank. I think he's a great character. Was super happy to see that he survived in kills, even though I don't think that was the intention. But and I think that it's got some good moments. It's got some missed opportunities, just like this whole film for me. But overall, I gotta say, like, it didn't leave me overly satisfied. It left me walking out of the theater saying, just shaking my head and going, really, that's how we're gonna do it? It just felt very safe. And at the end of this, though, like my most recent rewatch, it's one of those things. I'm just like, I think with a few more tweaks, we could have gotten there for me. I think that I have started to see a lot more of people's ideas, people's theories. I'm really eager to watch your video now after this conversation, Evan, because I really want to get more in detail with your thoughts and feelings with those, like your explanations and things. But I just think like, for me, every time I see this ending, I still just kind of feel like it's a little rushed. And again, comes back to that issue of like, this movie doesn't really know what story it wants to tell. Does it want to wrap up Michael, or does it want to, start Corey or use Corey? It's just, it feels disjointed. But that's really, I think, where I sit with it. And I like the elements that you brought up. I like what you've been able to give us here. But to wrap things up with this, because we're running out of our own time here. I know Luke's got somewhere he's got to be. So why don't we just give us a quick little thought, starting with Evan here. What do you think the legacy of this film is going to be, say, 5 years down the line?
Oh, 5 years, I don't know if it'll change much.
10 years.
Okay. Well, maybe it's such a divisive movie. And I mean, to be fair, I'm coming at it from a weird perspective because a lot of the Halloween movies that people really hate, I don't feel quite the same way. Halloween 3's gotten a lot of love lately, which is great. I just rewatched it the other day. Love that movie. But I even have weird opinions about the second Rob Zombie movie, which I'll talk about more when I get to my ranking video for it. But I have weird opinions about these movies. I would love to see Halloweenends kind of get a bit of a resurgence a la Halloween 3 a little bit. I don't know if it'll happen. Because this is more connected, it's harder for part of the reason people are able to come around to 3 is because it's disconnected. They can see it as their own thing, as its own thing. I don't know if the same thing will happen, but the legacy of this trilogy, I think, oh man, it's so difficult. I don't know. I would love to see it kind of get a little more love. I think it's the best timeline in the franchise, in my opinion. It's by far my favorite. And it's weird. I think it'll be seen as this like weird, inconsistent, experimental, but hopefully it will get a little more love over time. I did not word that well at all because I have absolutely no idea. I would like to see it kind of lift itself up a little bit. And I think it has the potential to, because I think David Gordon Green did some really cool things with this that don't get quite enough love because of how sudden a lot of it feels. But I think the ideas and the way they were executed, aside from feeling very sudden, worked. So I hope that with time, the things that it did well get more love than they are right now, because we're still kind of in that very potent emotional time with the movie and with the timeline in general.
Yeah, and for me, without a doubt, this movie as legacy in the horror community is going to be beloved. Looking at this film, and this is going to be a Halloween 3, which
Yeah.
the thing for me, one of the sticking points again, and I'm just going to touch on it, is the Halloween 3 like credits where Halloween 3 was a misstep where it was, oh, we're not going to tell Michael Myers' story. We're gonna go a different route, and they truly believe that. So you get credit, I think, for me. Yeah, you messed up, but you messed up and made a good movie, and we can go back and appreciate that. Whereas this one, when you put those credits in, you're telling the audience we're doing something different, intentionally, and it's like I don't think you get that credit if you're putting the Halloween 3 credits in there. But looking at it, I think this is going to be beloved without a doubt in a world where we're always reanalyzing things, and us horror fans, hey, we love to reanalyze things and do deep dives and find meanings to things where there probably aren't any meanings anyway. But so like looking at this film, in 20 years will there be is there going to be an article titled Halloweenends is actually the best in the franchise? Absolutely, without a doubt, that's going to be a thing, because right now we're dealing with, you went in for a Michael Myers movie and maybe you didn't get that. And that's what you're dealing with right now. And, we're dealing with this trilogy of, hey, we didn't get enough Michael. But when this comes out in 20 years, when you have a bunch of different Blu-rays and you can revisit this in your own leisure and say, when I feel like watching a Michael Myers movie, I'm going to pop one of those on. But when I feel like watching something different, I'm going to pop on Halloweenends and I'm going to love it because I'm prepared mentally to watch that. Whereas going into the theater and wanting a Michael Myers film, it didn't really happen. It left people underwhelmed. And I think, so is this film going to be beloved by a horror community in 20 years? Without a doubt. I guarantee it. There's no argument for me at all. I think that's going to happen. And, like looking at this as we're dealing with, rumors and a lot of stuff going on right now regarding the Halloween franchise, this film here would have been a perfect blueprint for a series where it's like, you can really draw all this out, have Michael show up 5th episode in, and in a 10 episode thing, and then you get Michael even more. I think this story would have been perfect for a TV series. And again, there's a lot of great stuff to expand and explore here, and I think you can do that in that vehicle. I think trying to fit it in and shoehorn in a lot of things from the first two was the biggest negative here, because you can't do it all, and you're going to leave people unsatisfied in more than one place. It's just the nature of the beast when, you're trying to fit everything into one story. But I think, this film for me right now is a big sticking point, but hey, I will probably go back at some point when I've had so much time to sit with this and say, I can enjoy Halloweenends for what it is.
And, I think that it's finding its audience. I think it's found an audience from day one. I know we've been harsh on it, and, you tend to follow in line with people who agree with your opinions. But, I think that, the fact that, we have passionate fans like Evan who, have been championing this trilogy, but you admit you've had your ups and downs too. So it's
I mean, you can look at my initial review for Halloweenends and I was pretty lukewarm on it. Like, I was not gushing about it at all. And I don't know if this video is still up because I wasn't super happy with the execution of it, but my initial review for Halloween Kills, very negative. So yeah, things have moved around.
And, I think that that's totally fair, because that's just how, we cinema is. Everybody will watch things and interpret things and have life experiences where they relate more to things. And I just think, like, in the time and place when this one came out, people were kind of hoping for one thing and we got another. And I think that like a Halloween 3, once we kind of step away from it, you will find people who enjoy this for what it is, who find more of the messaging that Evans found and others have found. I just think that, and Luke's right, as horror fans, it's bound to happen. But, for me, I do firmly believe that the David Gordon Green trilogy, where its legacy is going to sit, is I think that this has opened the door to not necessarily the Halloween franchise, but to horror in general. And, it's a bigger statement to make, but I think that without 2018's success, I think that we wouldn't have this kind of boom that we have over the last 2 years with things like Terrifier 2
Yeah.
and, you know, like Skinamarink and the Outwaters. Like, people are really taking dives, and it's because Halloween 2018 and this trilogy has kept people wanting to come back every October and really feel the spirit of Halloween like you do in that original. And I think that that's where its main sticking point is gonna be with people, and on the grand scheme is just gonna say, hey, this is the film that, you know, revitalized not only the horror genre but also revitalized, you know, a new generation in taking in Michael Myers and everything and taking it more seriously than I think they ever did. So
I really respect Blumhouse for allowing David Gordon Green to put this out.
yeah,
I mean, making this movie took fucking balls, and the fact that they were willing to be like, here's this huge franchise, we're gonna let you do some weird shit with it, makes me really excited for what they're gonna allow filmmakers to do in the future. I find that really cool.
and for some it was a swing and a miss, but I agree. I think that, you know, letting someone actually go out and do it, it's
Oh
admirable,
yeah.
especially as a creative. You know, it's nice to see that. It's, you know, why we like things like A24 and Neon and these other companies, because they let them, you know, run with it a little bit. It's better than, you know, hey, you got to make the next Paranormal Activity movie and it's got to do exactly what the last one did. All right, like, or you got to do this. It's like they let them say, hey, you know, we're going to take a drastic left turn here. Some people are going to like it, some aren't, and they were just like, okay, go for it. We'll see what happens. And
all right, I know we have to like
wrap
keep
up.
you guys
So,
going. Yeah, I know we're at that point now.
All good, but
yeah.
Alrighty, guys, that's gonna wrap it up here for us. Halloweenends 1 year later. Evan, go ahead and plug your channel real quick. Let everybody know what's going on.
Yes, so I run a horror channel called Rockland Graves Productions. I'm uploading weekly at the moment. I do deep dives on horror movies all the time. Lots of been going through the Exorcist movies recently. That will be over by the time that this comes out. I'll have reviews for all of the movies in the Exorcist franchise as well as a ranking. I have my fucking huge Halloweenends review that I've been working on for months, probably coming out the same day that this is. So I'm very excited for that, and then I'll have Halloween ranking. I've got plenty of stuff coming up in October. I'm doing Dracula Prince of Darkness soon with Christopher Lee, which is one of my favorite Dracula movies. I think it's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so I've got plenty of things planned, some fun little surprises that I haven't talked about yet that I'm excited to bring to fruition. But yeah, I've been trying to really push things on the channel, so if you can check it out, appreciate it.
Hell yeah, definitely do so. Definitely check out Evan's channel. He does a lot of great stuff. You know, I think that his quality is unmatched, and I definitely think that he's got a lot of wonderful opinions. You know, obviously we didn't rip each other's hair out, so we can respect each other.
What's the point of that?
Couple of just horror lovers here, just talking and debating. But alrighty, guys, it's gonna wrap us up here. As you know, this is Splattercast, so you guys can check us out. We're still going to be doing our partnership with Full Moon Features at this moment in time, so definitely check out those Tiny Terrors. I don't know, because we're shooting this so far in advance, if we've actually gotten to show those off yet, but if not, I do have the link down below here popping up under Evan, where you know, you guys can subscribe and get more information. I'm sure you can purchase them by now, so we'll find out. But yeah, other than that, guys, yeah, we got a lot of great stuff on the channel. Keep it here, keep it going with Splatterthon, and yeah, I guess that about wraps us up. So until next time, I am Dylan Newell.
And I'm Luke Janesco.
And I'm Evan from Rockland Graves.
And remember, stay scared.